Welcome to The One Inside, an internal family systems podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Sallenberger. On today's podcast, I talk with Dr. Frank Anderson about spirituality and a whole lot of other stuff. I am so excited to tell you about the Heirloom Summit, which is co-created by Duran Young, founder of Black Therapist Rock, and Dick Swartz, founder of IFS. It is intentionally taking place during Black History Month on February 26th through the 28th. We are going to be offering this collective healing experience as a powerful opportunity to explore the legacy burden of racism and anti-Blackness. Using IFS, we will explore the witnessing and unburdening process to work towards increased self-leadership and to begin repairing the personal impact of our traumatic history as a nation. Stay tuned for a link for the listeners of the One Inside podcast so you can receive a discount when you register. Hey everyone, hope you're doing okay. I am so excited about this podcast. Okay, so normally I start recording as soon as I meet with the guest. And usually I edit that and clean that up and try to just take all that stuff out. But what happened with Frank is we just immediately started talking and then the conversation just evolved. And when I went to edit it out, I tried to edit like 6 minutes of it out because it's like a six to 9 minute time that we are chatting about just checking in. I was like, well, some of it's not going to make sense later when we talk. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to leave it in. There's a part of me that's like, oh, who cares? Just leave it in. So I left it all in, and I hope you enjoy it. So if you don't know Frank Anderson is a superstar. That's what I think. I want to say a lot of people think that too, but I don't know what people think. But he's a superstar in the IFS and the trauma world. You may know him as a lead trainer for the IFS Institute. You may know him by his PESI workshops. I know a lot of people meet him because he does an intro to IFS PESI workshop. And he's the co-author of the IFS Training Manual. A part of me wants to say, it's the blue one. It's kind of big. And he's the co-author of that. He's a psychiatrist and a psychotherapist. And I assumed, which you might be coming to this too, and assuming, okay, he's a psychiatrist, we're going to talk about meds. And so I thought, yes, we're going to talk about meds and neurotransmitters. And I had some questions about meds. So boring, and I didn't get to ask any of my questions. So Frank is very personal, very engaging, and really funny. He shares so much of his own personal story, which I loved, and it's just really vulnerable and really real, again, which I loved. So I felt like when I was talking to him, I could have asked, the conversation could have gone like 10 different paths, and I kept just going back to asking like personal questions. Probably about 20 minutes on, we talk a lot about spirituality. And then about 35 minutes, we talk about integrating spirituality with research and science and the blending of those two worlds. In the midst of all of that, we talk a lot, again, about his personal story and just his sharing of his heart and his mind and his self, which I loved. And then we talk about the LGBTQ plus community and trauma. And then we talk a little bit about substance abuse. We talk a little bit about parenting throughout. And we end on, again, talking a little bit about psychedelics. And then at the very end, we talk about Frank's website and all the amazing things that he offers. So I'm super excited about it. I also wanted you to know that the summit, so the Heirloom Summit is going to be February 24th through 26th, which you heard at the beginning. And so from next week on until the week before the summit, I'm going to have different guests on who are involved in the summit in some way. So I'm super, super excited about that. So if you want to get the link, so right now I still have the Black Therapist Rock link, but I'm hoping to have a special link for the listeners of the podcast. I'm hoping to have that soon. Take care of yourself. I would love to connect with you on Instagram and Twitter at IFS Tammy, definitely on the One Inside Facebook page. I love checking in. I love hearing your feedback, and I love still hearing your words for the year. So definitely check in with me about that and enjoy. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good.
Thanks for fitting me in.
Yeah. Thanks for fitting me in 6 months later.
I'm like, I'm going to show up at Frank's house.
I was just talking to somebody. This has been such a crazy fall for me. Like it was January. Like I'm just starting to come up for air.
Mm,
It's amazing. Like I didn't realize um, because of I travel. I usually travel a ton, but then everybody switched to online and it was just way too much, and then everybody
mm,
wanted new stuff, but I wasn't traveling, so I was able to fit things in. So I'm just doing a private practice, writing a book. And like one week I was in Colorado, I was in Chicago, Toronto, and Korea in 1 week, all virtually, you know what I mean, like boom boom boom,
yeah.
boom, like, and the whole fall was like that. So it was really, I'm sorry I kept like, oh my god, like what could I push off, what could I push off? But I'm breathing now. I'm just like, I'm learning now in this new normal how to schedule things differently because it was way too much. Way.
Yeah. I definitely had a part that was like, um, felt pushed off.
Yes,
And then
of course.
I was
Yeah.
like, well, I mean, I know everyone's crazy busy. And so, no, but I'm glad we got to meet today.
Yeah.
And so I was
Yeah.
like, well, Frank doesn't know me, so he's not pushing me off because he doesn't know me to push me off.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. That's right. It was
And then
much
another part of
more.
me was like, if he knew me, he wouldn't push me off.
That's right. Yeah. Well, we'll see because I'm going to get to know you for the first time ever, really.
I know I'm super
Yeah.
excited. So I don't
Yeah.
know if you know, we actually met, which you probably don't know this, but we met. You did a
Hmm.
parenting seminar at the conference a couple years ago, and you were just putting out some of your parenting paper, like
Oh, was
PowerPoints.
this at
And
the networker
no, it
or
was at the
no?
IFS conference.
Oh, I did one there. That's right. Years ago. Oh, that's right.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you were the first, I know parenting is not on our agenda today, but you were the
Yeah.
first person to say that we parent based on like our before story.
Hmm.
And that has, I'm going to start crying. I'm like, we're not
Hmm.
talking about parenting, but that was so important to me because I had all this fertility stuff. And
Yeah.
so I only
Yeah.
have one child and I'm
Yeah.
obsessed with him and he
Yeah.
can do no wrong. And I am not the parent I thought I would be. I thought I would
Right.
be way more like, but if it takes you forever to have a kid and then
Yeah.
you can't have another one,
Right.
then I had no idea. Like it just,
Mhm.
you saying that just, yeah. So thank you for
Right.
that.
Ah, good, good. Yeah. Well, that I love. I keep evolving on that. I've done a 1 day. I've done a couple 1 days for parenting. I do 3 hours. Like it is one of those. I love speaking on that because it's so personal.
Yeah.
Like it's like I start. I'm like I'm not the expert. Just saying, not the expert. Like, yeah, it's such a. I mean, that's what really got me in the IFS.
Shut
That's
up.
why was here
No.
totally, totally. Like I had done so much therapy in my life, so much. And then I started getting triggered with my kid, my first kid, and I was like, holy shit, I am not repeating this. That's what got me into IFS. Really, that is how I started IFS was because of my oldest son. Yeah.
Wow. So did you like find someone who was like, how did you find IFS? Like you were, yeah, tell me that story.
Well, yeah, I found IFS through Bessel, really. Because I have for years done workshops for Bessel van der Kolk at his annual trauma conference. I've been with Bessel since 1992.
Okay.
And so I think there was 1 year I was doing a workshop, and then had this guy Dick Schwartz doing a workshop. He had felt like Bessel always finds out about people, and then he like brings them into the conference. And so I'm like, all right, I'll go to it. And I was like, it was one of those kind of Oprah. I talk about this a lot. An Oprah aha moment for me was like, and I just kept nodding, like I had done a ton of trauma work, working with trauma clients. I was a psychiatrist for the trauma center for years, and there was something different about this unburdening process, like healing wounds. Nobody ever talked about that before. Like it was one of
Mm.
those get the parts out of the past permanently. Are you kidding me? So, and I went up to Dick Schwartz after. It's like, hi, I'm Frank Anderson, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, yeah, I saw you in the second row nodding a lot. Like he's like, I was like one of the dogs in the back of the car bobbing my head, you know. I
Right.
was like, it
Yeah.
was like so resonated. And it was
Wow.
like from that moment, then I just totally shifted everything. I think that was like my son was born in 2004. So it was around 2004 that
Wow.
it was like that, oh my God. And it was all about the stuff that got activated so deep
Yeah.
that I had
Yeah.
that was not being triggered at all in my life, you know.
Well,
Because
kids can do that to you, right?
kids
It
can
just,
do that.
yeah.
You got it. That's exactly right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love it. Well, I feel so glad that we have you, like
Mm,
that we as our IFS community, like we got
mm,
you, and that makes me
yeah.
just so happy.
Yeah. It's good. It's a good place for me to be. It really it fits. It works. It's in so many ways. It's kind of full alignment now, which feels great.
Great.
Yeah, it really does.
So I don't know if you're familiar with the podcast, but I usually start with asking people. I mean, we've already started, but just
Yeah.
to sort of back up a little bit, I always ask with asking people where they are in the world, and just like telling everybody where you are, because we have people from all over the world that listen to it. And so
Mm-hmm.
tell me where you are in the world, and if you were to look out your nearest window, what do you see?
So I am currently in Harvard, Massachusetts, and it's a great question. Excuse me. If I look out the window right now, what do I see? Because I happen to be, for the moment, in my bedroom, looking out the window at a bunch of trees because we live in the woods, and
Mm,
it's such a in this day and age and in this time. I haven't been in the office to see a client since March, of course, like most of us, and I've really, really loved this home office thing. And
mm,
typically, my home office is now upstairs on the second floor, but we happen to have people fixing some of our TV rooms. So we've got contractors in the house, which is for very loud and noisy therapy sessions with my clients. So I don't need to tell my clients that I'm in my bedroom, but the office, as of late, has been moved to the bedroom, looking out into the woods. So it's such a bizarre, like, you make it work now, right?
yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah, I love
yeah.
that. I don't think of Harvard as having woods. Like when I think of Harvard, I don't think of it
Well,
as
so it's interesting because most people think of Harvard as Harvard University. And in fact, Harvard University is not in Harvard at all.
right. It's in
So
Cambridge, isn't
it's
it?
in Cambridge. That's
Right.
exactly right. I live in this really beautiful, beautiful rural town about 45 minutes outside of Boston, which is where most of the Harvard professors summered. So they taught. It's called Harvard because there's a little pond here. Every house has 2-acre minimums. Like it's a
Mm,
beautiful, bucolic, like bedroom community, if you will. And all the professors would come out here and hang out in the summer. So it's why it's called Harvard. So most people do confuse it, that we live in this really kind of small, rural, 6,000 people
that's awesome.
here. So it's a very peaceful, like I've been really, it's a beautiful place to quarantine.
I love it.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I have clients that I have one client who was living in I can't think of it now that I'm saying it. It's right next to Cam it's, like, along that, like, line in Cambridge, and I can't think of the name of it now,
Yeah.
but she's like, they basically don't leave their apartment,
It's
like and she
yeah.
was like, they had to get groceries delivered, and
Yeah.
even if she got up at, like, 6 o'clock in the morning to go for a walk, she had to wear a mask because
You got it.
everyone else was out, and I
Yeah.
was like, Boston was so
Yeah.
bad.
It really is. We were Boston and New York were really part of the first wave in that way, and we got hit very early and very hard. And yeah, Boston, Cambridge, Brookline. There's all these communities around there, very concentrated. It's New England. This is where the country kind of started, so it's very concentrated.
Yeah.
We used to live in the city before we had kids, and we kind of moved out. It's 45 minutes out of the city. We used to have chickens. Like it's very rural quickly because of the way New
Mm,
England is so spaced
yes.
together.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I feel fortunate. Like we can take walks. We have, conservation land in our backyard, and it's just been so lucky, fortunate, super
That's awesome.
grateful to
Yeah.
have the space to be able to quarantine.
How are your kids doing?
Really interesting. Such a mix, I would say.
Mm,
In some ways, we've, like maybe many people, we've had the best family time ever in this last
mm,
year, you
mhm.
know, um, and it's been really hard socially, especially my teenager just wants to be with his friends, and that's
Yeah,
just so difficult for him. And my youngest, who's on the spectrum, has been, very isolating and isolative and challenging. So in some ways, it's hard for them developmentally,
yeah.
but in other ways, and it's interesting, they love the quiet life. I have to say, it's
Mm,
interesting. The like the holidays, for example, they're like, isn't it great? It's just the four of us for
aw,
Thanksgiving. And isn't this great that we're not going anywhere for Christmas? So they appreciate this
wow.
kind of quiet solitude that we're really living in right now. And,
Mm,
I don't know if you saw the movie Little Women, the new version that came out last year, right?
yeah.
It was filmed in my town.
What?
So Harvard is like, this is where all that stuff originated, right? So
Wow, yeah.
that we were, remember when the movie cameras and the crews came and everything like this, and they were filming Little Women in our town. So it was such a bizarre like juxtaposition to watch Little Women during quarantine, and we were like living it. It's like we're homeschooling, we're taking walks, nobody driving. Like, it was such a bizarre thing
Right.
that we like really resorted back to those very simple basic times. And so it
Mm.
was a very weird, and in the space where that's the way it used to be.
Okay, so then
Yeah.
tell me about this. How are you doing with, because this is what's happening for me. There's that going on a little bit, but then there's the other thing that you're talking about, that you're almost too busy, because it's
Yes.
like now
It's it
right,
is
so it's like I can't, I'm like, I feel like a responsibility as a mental health provider.
That's right.
So all my old clients are coming back. So I'm
Yes.
busier than ever, plus the
Yeah.
podcast, plus I'm also writing a book. So
Yeah.
how am I supposed to, everyone else is sort of slowing down and chilling, and
Yeah.
I'm not. That's been very hard
Isn't it really
for me.
complicated?
Yeah.
Like, I'm in the same position. I agree with you. And so I held a couple things about it. From a spiritual perspective, I feel like I never want to go back to the way it was. Okay, I was traveling like a nut, super busy. Everybody was go, 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 go. So the hard stop was incredibly valuable in some ways, and it made me really reevaluate everything. I was like, wait a minute, like this. These kids are going to be gone. I want to spend every second with them. I love walking upstairs to work and walking downstairs for. So in some ways, I really want to preserve that. And oh, by the way, we're in a global pandemic. This is trauma for everyone. Okay.
Yeah.
And so there is this pulling in, and I think about it as a double trauma, and everybody's traumatized, which then triggers everybody's history.
Mm,
Okay. So we are also, some people are traumatized because they have no job, no money, and no place to live. Those people need help.
mhm.
And then everybody else is trying to maintain and survive. And like, I don't have any colleagues that and friends of mine that have any space for clients. Everybody I know is full.
Yeah.
So there is this increased need that I feel very committed to. It reminds me, because I did some work for September 11th, like living in Boston and working with the trauma center. We went over to ground zero, and I did work, and I almost feel like I'm back there a little bit, like
Mm,
helping people in this trauma.
yeah. Yeah.
Needless to say, what we all went through a couple of days ago, for example, like layers and layers of trauma. And Tammy, for me, like, there's the double trauma, as I say, the current day trauma, but it triggers so much. Historically, I've done so many legacy burdens for people, right? Stuff from their history, Holocaust, any number of family legacy cultural burdens that are also coming up, being
Yeah.
restricted, being contained, being held down, all this stuff. So
Mm,
it is this very weird, for me, peaceful, quiet, and busier than ever
yeah.
new normal, if you will.
Yeah.
So, and I wasn't expecting. to be this busy at all. I
Yeah.
didn't think it, but the need makes sense, right?
Yeah. At the beginning, my husband was like, "The banks are closed. I don't understand why you're so busy." Because he was working from home and he was handling like almost all the remote learning. And I was like, I don't like, it,
Yeah. That's exactly. The banks are closed. And that's so funny. He says that because I haven't used money in months. Like, it's like that, I don't use Bitcoin, but it's like the whole money exchange is like, who uses a dollar anymore? Everything is Square or Venmo. Like, we've just learned how to interact
right.
virtually, even with money. Like, who
Yeah.
would go to a bank? Like, what's the point? It's so bizarre because it's all, virtual, like everything's this new virtual world in this bizarre way. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
So tell me about, let's talk about this spirituality because it's like
Mhm.
this, it is a chance.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a part of me that's like, there's all these I'm having missed chances or missed opportunities. So this
Mm.
is a chance for me to be and to connect more spiritually. So tell me about that and tell me about how spirituality like integrates and ties into IFS.
Yeah, it's such, like that when you even say that, it warms my heart. Like, that's such an important piece for me in my life right now. It's been that way for quite a while. And, I'm really incorporating so much more spirituality into my work with IFS. I'm going to be teaching more about spirituality. I've done workshops on this now. And it's so important. And oh, by the way, the world is in this huge spiritual transformation. Do you know what I mean? So it's like there's
Yeah.
this parallel going on right now. And I keep saying I'm on the right, I feel like I'm well aligned for what's coming up, what's coming ahead,
Mm,
because there is this huge shift that we're in. Change doesn't happen typically easily or smoothly. And there's so much tumult in the world. And there are these great opportunities in what we're going through right now that's going to position us, I firmly believe, into a much, much better place. And so this is not, I have a similar story that Dick does. Dick and I talk about this a lot because he grew up with a bunch of doctor brothers and doctor father and very non-spiritual. And I was, Harvard trained doctor, medical world, all this. And, luckily enough, and I don't think it's luck, I think this is exactly the trajectory, as I married this man who is incredibly spiritual, and
mm,
I was all sciency and he was all spiritual. And he was, I know exactly why he came into my life. And he brought this whole spiritual dimension
mm.
into our family and our life that opened up this world for me, which has been incredible. And just like, it's like, okay, stop, slow down, see what, ask for help. It's
Mm,
available. It's outside of you. You don't have to work so hard, Frank. So it was this huge,
mm,
like, relief as a doctor who needs to know, right? To have this energy and this presence in my life.
yeah.
So my spiritual journey really started with my husband. We've been together for 21 years now, I think. So, it's
Mm,
been this kind of cultivation. And then working with Dick and being very close to him and seeing him kind of see this stuff evolve too, it just allowed me to just expand that and include my spiritual life into my clinical work. Because,
mm,
as Dick and I did this level 2 IFS trauma level 2 training together for 6 or 7 years or something like that. And so, he would always include spirituality in his level 3. And I'm like, Dick, if we're doing a trauma training, I need to include guides and unattached burdens. And he's like, okay, let's do it. You know what I mean? So we started bringing spirituality into the level 2 training, which was wonderful. And so I started incorporating my personal spiritual life with the work. And, with IFS, it just dovetails so beautifully.
yeah. Yeah.
And I have a chapter in this new book that I have coming out on IFS trauma and spirituality, because it's really a very important piece of trauma survivors had so much taken away from them, and they are so much about protection and control. And part of the healing is letting go in a way that feels safe, which includes
Mm,
spirituality, but you have to do so much work up front with protectors in order to allow that kind of openness to come
mm,
in. And when
mhm,
people do that, so much healing happens because there's so much resource outside of oneself if you're open to it.
mm.
So
Yeah,
it really, from the trauma perspective, spirituality is a very important component to healing, and so much blocks healing, that spirituality can override and overcome in a way if you think about legacy burden or unattached burdens. So it's such an important interweave,
yeah,
in the work of trauma from my perspective. And, the thing that Dick has been a little bit nervous, not anymore. He's come a long way. He's got a new book coming out, with Sounds True, which is great around spirituality and stuff. And you just, he's been more hesitant to talk about it historically because of the fear and worry about how people are going to receive this. And a
yeah,
little bit for me, I'm like, well, it's not my model. Like I could speak about it. Like, I'm not upholding a model here. I'm not, I'm
yeah,
one of the leaders in the field, if you will, that's able to support the work as opposed to holding it as my work. So
yeah,
I had much less fear
yeah,
around talking about spirituality and talking about guides and talking about past life issues and all this unattached burdens because I didn't have as much to lose maybe as he did, but he's certainly come a long way around that. He's much more comfortable.
yeah.
And I'm excited. I'm really, thinking him and I have talked about this. And, in my copious free time, if you will, I really want to do a level 2 IFS spirituality and psychedelics training, because that's another arena that kind of opens up the world of spirituality is psychedelic medicine.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I'm passionate about it. And I want to see how we can create a course for the IFS Institute that incorporates spirituality and psychedelic medicine because it's like trauma, parenting, spirituality are kind of like my main passions, if you will, right now at this point.
Okay, so I'm gonna back you up because I have like a
Yeah,
zillion questions.
absolutely.
So, can I ask you some personal questions?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Okay, you don't have
absolutely.
to answer them, but
Yeah.
so, if you've been around sort of Dick and sort of, I know a little bit about his story, but I'm curious about your story, about your, like you said, you don't have to go, 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 go.
Yeah.
So was that part of the like going to Harvard, becoming a doctor? Was there these parts of you that were like, I've got to go, 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 go?
Yeah.
And in this very science driven way.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Can you talk about
Absolutely.
that a little bit?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, a couple things about it. So, I'll give you a couple things. So, kind of, I was going to probably be a pediatrician. I loved kids. I always loved kids. I kind of figured that's what I would do. My dad was a pharmacist. And so I grew up in this, my mom was a nurse. So I grew up in this very medical community. And then a family member of mine, my sister, had major mental illness, kind of a bipolar break in her teens, which was just devastating for our family,
Mhm.
And so that was just a huge piece that just derailed me. I have all these, I'm the oldest kid, caretaking, I got to take care of her. And
Mm,
so I really kind of shifted in some ways from pediatrics to psychiatry to kind of save her and
okay.
rescue her. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And surprise, surprise, unbeknownst to me, what I was really doing was saving her and focusing outside and being an expert because I wasn't really connected to my own trauma history. I wasn't really
Mm,
connected to my own wounding. You know what I mean? And it was, I would
yeah.
talk about the consummate caregiver. Like, caregiver first, for
Was that your
sure.
role in the family even
Totally.
before her? Okay.
Totally.
Okay. Was it just the
So,
two of you or was there more
no, I
kids?
have a brother and another sister, so 4 kids. But
Okay.
I
And
was
you were
the
the
oldest,
oldest. Yeah.
taking care of everybody. So, this initial thrust to go and save her, when I got into psychiatry, then I started like, holy cow, there's a lot going on in here. Then I did the U-turn, if you will, for the first time and
Mm,
really kind of realized my history and the
mm,
trauma for me, but still very much in that Harvard fix it, do it kind of way. You know what I mean? It wasn't
mm-hmm.
really until my husband introduced this kind of, well, maybe you can not work so hard and maybe there is help outside. You know what I mean? So he kept planting that
Mm.
seed, even though I knew why I was there
Right.
was personal. But there was still this, I'll go to the number one trauma center in the world. I'll work with Bessel van der Kolk, like this driven, accomplished achievement
Yeah.
piece in me.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, Tammy, the real switch was when my husband and I tried to have a baby. It's like, well, I can't do that one. Well, I can't make that one happen. Like it was kind of like I'm competent, but can't do that. And
Yeah.
there was
Yeah.
such a letting go in that. It was like, okay,
Mm,
like I have to let go. And I'll
mm,
remember the moments of letting go because, I have no control over having a baby. I mean, most people don't, anyways,
right.
but there was a different level of letting go. And I remember a shift in my life, like the first time, all right, you are not in charge here. You have no control over this. You have to let it go. And that was it was like a relaxation for me, and it was really the first time in my life I really let go.
Wow.
And then after trying for 6 months, rounds and rounds of inseminations and surrogacy and all this stuff, I let go in June, and she got pregnant in July. It was
Wow.
like not coincidental
Right.
at all.
Yeah.
And it was
Yeah.
so related to letting go. And for me, I would say that's where I spiritually was like, got it. Okay. And my life shifted
Yeah.
from that point forward in that way,
Yeah, that
being
makes so much
open.
sense to me, right? Because
Yeah.
you're like, I'm going to be the best. I'm going to try and I'm going to do what I'm going to do. What I'm going to do. And it's interesting that it's like all this, it's really all these external things, though, right? I'm
You
going to
got
do
it.
all these things.
Yeah.
And then there's this thing that you can't control. And it's,
That's right. It's been, I mean, I still do a lot. I still accomplish a lot, but I also am so much better at letting go.
mm,
And so much better at asking for help and letting it unfold. Like even in the current day situation, I've been holding like, all right, this is the way it's supposed to be. All right, I'll be here to help the change. I'll bring more love and compassion to the world. I'm not going to stop what's happening. I'm going to be a part of the change that's necessary. And if this is the way it's supposed to go, I trust that. Do you know
yeah.
what I mean? Just
Yeah, which is
living
way more
life that way.
spiritual, right? It's
Yeah,
way more spiritual. And like
that's
there
right.
is this change. There is this, there is a huge change happening. And people talk about that with like the stars and the moon and all that stuff, which
Yeah,
I don't really understand. But there's
that's right.
there are people talking about that. And
Yeah,
so yeah, there is going to be an upheaval. And then right, I could try to change it and control. I can try to control it, which feels
yes,
very like efforty and part driven, or
totally.
I can sort of do the
Yeah.
spiritual letting go. And there's something that we don't see that's happening.
So beyond us.
Yeah.
That's a thing. So my husband will probably kill me, but he's been studying in mediumship for several years now. So it's a world that he lives in, and he's always like, "Hey, read this book. Hey, here's a reading." So he always, I just did an energy reading with somebody. It was a Christmas present that he gives me all these readings and stuff. So he's really exposed me to a lot. Like most of my reading is spiritual reading, and most of the stuff that I read is this whole other world and how the world
Mm,
works, and how there's so much, like if you think about the level of souls, the level of ascended masters, like there's all these spiritual layers beyond our human existence here. And so I've been opened up to so much of that through my reading. And there's
mm,
so much beyond us that is like, I'll give you a good example of this. Like there's so little we know about it from the grand scheme. when we're in human form, if I think about our souls, right? Like I read this one book for this woman, Tina Louise Spalding. I like a lot of her work. And she channeled a bunch of famous people who had died, and she got this whole information. And there was this piece for me that was like, oh my God. And she had channeled, it was interesting because she had heard this voice and she wrote it down, and it ended up being both Kennedys. Like she channeled Bobby and JFK, and they came down as one voice. And the information that she got from them, and this is a channeling from Ananda, which is this group of ascended masters. And they said, we knew we were an important family and we knew we were going to change the world, but we had no idea that our being assassinated was the way that our impact on the world, that our impact would have in the world. We thought being the president was our vehicle of change. But when we transitioned, we realized, oh, the way we were going to change the world was the impact and the effect that the assassinations had on everybody. And it was one of those things for me, like, what, we don't really know. Like, and that made even sense to me because they had huge impact on the change in the world, right?
Right.
But not in the way that our human minds may think about it,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
I'm always open to, there's a lot I don't know. And there's a lot of forces beyond us. So I'm just going to be open to that.
So, how does that fit into being a psychiatrist and a
Mm-hmm.
medical doctor? And I was thinking about, right, so sort of there's a lot I don't know. And you just talked about channeling, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
and you're a psychiatrist. So, tell me about that, which I
Yeah.
love, because I feel like when you talk about Dick and Dick working so hard to prove this model, right? So, he
Yeah.
worked so hard to prove this model, and now he's a little more open now that it's got a lot of feet to it. I'm not
You
saying that
got
right,
it.
but right now that he can introduce the spirituality because he's really proven himself and the model has proven himself. So
Yeah.
he's sort of doing that, but you're doing that too. So
Yeah.
tell me about that.
Well, so it's interesting because it's more of an integration. I mean, I was John and Dick asked me to run the foundation for self-leadership many years ago, and that whole charge of the foundation for self-leadership was bringing research and validity to the IFS model. And part of me was like, guys, we're talking about firefighters, exiles, and managers. You want me to translate that to a research grant to get a research proposal? Like, hello, that's a big ask. Like, so there was a lot about blending these two worlds that was very complicated because we still did this paper on IFS and complex trauma. It's been 6 years, it hasn't been published yet, and we just right now we just like are submitting for hopefully an approval and for in a trauma journal, because it's like translating the language and how nobody even knows what IFS is and making it
Right.
scientific and using different language. So it's blending those two worlds has been a complicated one in reality, in the medical community and the scientific community. Thank goodness Nancy Shattuck did the research paper on, rheumatoid arthritis. And I really do believe this paper in complex trauma will be approved at some point and published. But
That's a long journey though. That's
it's
a
a
long time.
and it speaks to this is a grassroots model that we're trying to give scientific validity.
Yeah.
We're doing EEG and physiology. There was another study that we did on physiological. Hooked everybody up to monitors and heart rate monitors and things and doing IFS sessions with them. So bringing physiological validity to the model. So there's this, and somebody says it takes about 10 years to prove what you already know. So it's a long journey in the research world to prove what we know. And it's, I'm not in the foundation anymore, but that's doing its thing. So getting this, proving that validity. But for me personally, they're much more integrated to me. Science is, it's kind of like the way I talk about it in the training that I do is the mind and the brain. Okay, if you think about that, like the mind is imagination and the brain is neurons and networks and neurotransmitters. And we really integrate the mind and the brain in psychotherapy. Do you know what I mean? And so it's like the medicine spiritual mind brain connection.
Yes, I
you
love
know?
that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's the
love
way I
that.
think of it. So it's not an either or.
Yeah,
It's how, if you have enough information in both worlds, how do you bring them together?
I love
Right.
it. I love
Yeah.
it. Can we do a huge jump and
Sure.
talk about the LGBTQ community?
It's really interesting. So, yeah, this is, I've spent so much of my career in trauma, trauma, trauma. This next book, I'm super excited about it. It's IFS for complex trauma. I'm going to, our working title is Transcending Trauma, Healing Complex Trauma with Internal Family Systems. So that's a big piece
Love
of
it.
work.
Yeah,
It's my life's work in some ways. It's going to be published in April, and that'll be out there. We're looking for that soon. I'm excited about that. A great,
that is
great,
exciting.
great work. So proud of it. Like, I don't even know how well it's going to do, Tammy, but I'm so proud of it. Like, it's like,
I
I
love it.
feel so good about it. Like, I hope you guys like it too, but I do, It was
Yeah.
like, it's really my heart and soul in
Hmm.
that piece of trauma for, a while. And now that body of work is going to be out there in that way, it kind of opens me up to do all these other things, which I'm passionate about. Parenting was creeping in for a long time, but it's like, oh yeah, Frank, like you're a gay man. Like, hello, you've never even really talked about that. It's never even been a part of my teaching. And,
Mm.
it's something that has been interesting and we haven't done much about it in the IFS community, really, LGBTQ plus. And I in my private practice, I work with a lot of trans people, I've worked with a lot of gay people, and it's just who I am. But I've never been in the teaching mode around it.
Yeah.
And this fall, I work with a group up in Canada, Leading Edge Seminars, Michael Kerman. He's a lovely guy, and he has me do a lot of workshops for him. He's like, Frank, this fall, teach a bunch of different things that you want to teach. So he did this. We did this like 6-session course on me teaching all these different topics: substance abuse, shame, spirituality, parenting, and LGBTQ plus. So it was really great to start that journey of, hey, I want to incorporate that into my teaching world too.
Yeah.
So I just started, I did a 3-hour workshop for them in the fall. And I just started, when you get into this creative process of teaching, you start reading things, you start looking at things and thinking about how all this literature incorporates with IFS. So it is another one of these topics, honestly, that I'm very interested in. And I have a ton of experience because I've just been quietly doing the work for years. I just haven't
Mm.
turned it into a workshop yet. You know what I mean? So there's a lot that I have, like that'll be coming too. It's like coming attractions, if you will, of that world because like there's so much trauma just by being who you are
Mm.
as a gay person. Like you are not okay
Mm.
in the world when you're born. Like there is, and it's inherent, it's ubiquitous, it's cultural, it's personal, it's family.
Yeah.
Shame, it's just like part of what it is. And I've done so much therapy on it. I don't live in that shame at all anymore. But when I look upon it, it is a trauma to be a gay person in this world, no matter, even if you live in California or Massachusetts. Do you know what I mean? Like it's true. So
Yeah.
there's a whole
Yeah.
trauma piece around that. There's a way that internally and externally, like
Mm.
I remember looking at my uncles and be like, I got to act like that. That's what a man is. And that's how I have to be. So, as a very early age, as a kid, I would watch my uncles and see the way they interacted because I knew I wasn't right. And I knew that I had to be like that. So, you just inherently are wrong
Mm.
and you have to fit into this world. And nobody even has to talk about it. It just is what it is. Do you
Wow.
know what I mean? So there's
Yeah.
so much in that shame, and your parents, you have to hide a huge portion of who you are, even with your parents, because you're
Mm.
not acceptable, because
Mm-hmm.
you know what the world wants. Do you know
Mm.
what I mean? So there's so much that is deeply embedded in this gay experience for
Mm.
people
Yeah.
that I'm, excited to talk about, excited to teach about. And, The trans piece I'll talk about in a little bit because that's a whole different dimension of it, which
Mm,
I just love that work so much. I love working with trans people. Um, but then there's the whole self dimension, Tammy, in the LGBTQ, because it's very interesting. And I've thought about this a lot. And I know my work will expand on this because it, self energy, from my perspective, does have gender and orientation in it. When I think about the human experience of self energy, gay is who I am.
mm,
Okay. My gender, a man is who I am. Like gender and orientation for me, experientially, is encompassed in self energy. It's not my gay part, it's who I am. Okay. Now, so there's this whole dimension of LGBTQ orientation and gender with self that is a whole world to explore. Okay.
mm-hmm.
When I go into the spiritual dimension, gender and sexuality fall away. When I've done psychedelics work, when I'm in that other spiritual world, I don't feel a gender and I don't feel any orientation. So I do see these differentiations between our human embodied self and our spiritual self around gender and orientation.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah. Well,
I'm,
that makes sense, right? If I think of like
doesn't it?
myself and my
Yeah.
soul, maybe
Yeah.
that would be, there would be, yeah.
It's a
Yeah. That
difference.
makes
Do you
sense.
know what I
Yeah.
mean? So
Yes.
I'm looking at those differences between the human embodiment of self energy and
Yeah.
the body that it has to express itself through
Yes.
versus the soul of self energy. So
Yeah.
self is very intertwined with gender and orientation in a way that I don't think people really pay attention to so much,
Mm,
right?
yeah. Yeah.
And the same thing is true even more so for trans people because it is gender and sexuality. And people really confuse those all the time.
Yes.
They don't
Yes.
get, they just don't get that gender and orientation are two totally different issues,
Yeah. Yeah.
and people who are trans deal with both.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So with so I love seeing teenagers, and I have a
Mm,
couple trans teens, and what I
yes.
tell them all the time is my generation, we have no idea what you're talking about. And I'm trying so hard, but you guys in so many ways are creating a whole new world and
Yeah.
new definitions. And
Paradigm.
yeah, yeah, and even people that want to know don't understand. Like even if I
Yeah.
come to this just curious, and so I'll tell them like I'm gonna ask stupid questions because I
Yeah.
don't know. And
Yeah.
yeah, and yeah. So even without having judgments on them, I'm
Right.
like these, my heart goes out to them because they're creating something so new. Well,
Here's
and
the
it
way I
probably
would say
isn't
it.
new, but it's
They're accessing something that we haven't accessed before. Because I don't think they're creating anything. I think they're open to it in a way that we weren't.
okay,
That's the way I
okay.
see it, because this is the way it's always been. It's
Yeah.
just hasn't been acknowledged. It hasn't been embraced. The room it hasn't been safe. Okay. It's traumatic. So it has not been
Yeah.
safe to explore gender and orientation in the way that I think about it over. I'm 57. I think about it the over 40 and under 40. Like people over 40 are in a different generation when you come to orientation. You know what I mean? Like there's
Yes,
this younger
yes.
generation that's Joe Court speaks about this a lot. He's a friend and colleague of mine who writes about and talks about this a lot. The divide between the generations around this fluidity and
Mm.
orientation stuff.
I
You
love
know,
that. Well, thinking about your story, I mean, I think like the idea that the room wasn't safe. So your story is this little boy that felt like something was wrong, something, and so he looked at
yeah,
his uncles, and if the room's not safe, he would have molded himself to pretend to be his uncles his entire life.
totally, 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 absolutely. And I did
Yeah.
that, and many people do that. I mean, kids are coming out much sooner now. It's great, but they're not coming out at birth. They're not coming
Yeah.
out from the beginning. They still have a version of that. We
Mm.
had it much longer. And it's an interesting thing. This is part of why it's funny. Part of why the LGBTQ stuff is coming after the trauma book is everybody heals in a different order, and we trust the system. I had to heal my own trauma before I could deal with gender and orientation. Some people need to do gender and orientation before they do their trauma. You know what I mean? This was
Yeah, I
just
love
my
that.
order. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And this
Yep.
was the natural order for me. So we'll look at that, like to be able to, where is the safety in that? It was very clear to me, not that it was conscious, that
Right.
I had to heal. I had to heal the internal world was not safe enough until that external trauma was sorted out and
Yes.
healed. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean? That's
Yeah.
how it worked for me.
I love that. When I think of the order of your workshops, like right, like how
That's
you're
right. That's
right,
right.
right. So
That's
you're
right.
like, okay, so how to do the spirituality, and
Yeah.
then then
Yeah.
the trauma, and then the parenting,
Yeah.
and
And the
it's like,
LGBTQ stuff,
yeah,
that's exactly right.
yeah,
Yeah. It
and
is
that's just
the
how your process is.
exactly. That's exactly right.
You're like,
Yeah.
I'll workshop it, and then I'll develop it into a book, and then it'll be a level two, and
Yeah. That's exactly right. It's interesting. Leading with the cognitive, I've got all the cognitive, and then moving into the spiritual. Yeah, that's
because that
exactly
probably
right.
feels really safe for you, right? And I think that probably feels safe for a lot of people, right? I
Yeah.
understand it intellectually. My intellectual parts really get it.
Yeah.
And then that opens up safety for
Yeah.
other parts of me to get it.
The total deeper exploration on the emotional, soul, spiritual level.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Do you want to talk a little bit about substance use?
Yeah, sure. Because, it's interesting. So this month, actually, I'm doing a continuity program. C. Sykes and I are doing for the Institute, which I'm super excited about because that's another topic, and CEASE has been so wonderful for our community about bringing substance abuse. I think Mary Kruger, too, also has done a lot of work on substance use. So I really respect all the pioneering work that they have done, around substance use. And for me, again, there's this personal component, which I'll talk about in a minute, but it also is very rooted in trauma, my trauma work. So it's rare to work with trauma survivors when there isn't some form of addiction, like
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
substance use, whether it's food, whether it's gambling, whether it's sex, whether it's
Yeah.
any substance, right?
We
So
got to soothe ourselves some way.
it's an external source of soothing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, and I became kind of this subspecialty for me because of my work with trauma is working with substance use. So I've been doing that work for a long time and, just been able to write about it again in this book that's coming out. But it's one of those later topics because there's a lot of substance abuse in my family. So I grew up in that
Mm.
environment that was very traumatic for me in some ways and very oppressive. So, again, in that safety is, the more I heal, the safer it is for me to talk about it. So there is a personal component. I don't personally, like you can either join it or become anti,
Hmm.
right?
Yes.
And it's like
Yes.
I am like so anti-substance. Like I'm like so clean. I went the other way. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Right.
What I grew
Right.
up in, and people
Right.
can
Well, you have
go any way.
managers then, right? That's what happens is you have really strict managers that are like, nope, we're going to have these rigid rules around it.
It started out as managers, but it's not what it is anymore. It's soul alignment. Like I am
Mm,
I am just clean and aligned because for me substances take us out of alignment. There it really does. So I am like more aligned than I ever have been because nothing's taking me out anymore. Do you know what I mean? So
yes.
it was manager driven reaction to, but it's not that at all anymore. There's this alignment of clean.
Mm,
Nothing blocks my flow.
mm,
Okay, because substances can block flow, right? So
I love
that's the
that.
way I see it now is a different thing. But I love teaching about it, and I'm like teaching about it in the context of trauma. I do this work
Right.
on
Well, you just said take me out. So when I think about
right.
trauma, I think of like I need to be taken out. And I think
Yes.
about even what happened this week as I was
Yeah.
like eating ice cream. I
Yes.
needed to be taken
You
out,
got
you
it.
know?
That's exactly right. Those are those external soothers, those
Yeah.
external protectors that are super valuable,
Yeah.
And so I'm excited about adding that dimension to my teaching. And, Cease and I we've been filming And it's so great to work with her, and it's been so fun. So I'm excited for people to be able to learn, because we do talk about and teach things differently a little bit. So it's great in this continuity program. People are going to get this combo of her expertise and then my additions as it relates to trauma. And there's a whole piece on shame that I talk about, because it's hard to have any substance use without a shame cycle. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
definitely.
So I talk a
Definitely.
lot about shame as it relates to substances also.
That's great.
Yeah,
That's great.
I'm excited about.
We could hit all those topics again.
Yes, we could. And you know what? Yeah, we will, because these are a lot of these are these new expansions. As I've kind of finished this book, I'm going to be expanding all of these topics: substance
Love it.
use, LGBTQ, spirituality, and parenting too.
Yeah.
And the psychedelics. That's a piece that we haven't talked much about here. You'll be seeing, I'm currently working on a new course for the Institute. I did this fall course with PESI and the Institute on IFS integration, where I interviewed a bunch of the lead trainers. I'm
Okay.
currently working on a course right now for IFS, integrating IFS with other models of therapy, which I'm super excited about. So I'm looking at EMDR and sensory motor and all this stuff with IFS. But one of the things I'm looking at is psychedelics and incorporating that. So one of the lectures in this new course is going to be incorporating psychedelic medicine with IFS too. So that's a whole nother topic.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, IFS seems to really go along well with that.
Yes, it
Yeah.
does. And I'll say there are wonderful ways to do it and not so wonderful ways to do it. So it's not the panacea, fix everybody thing that a lot of people are hoping it's going to be.
Okay.
And it's going to be a very useful addition for a certain segment of the population.
I love it.
Is the way I think about it. Yeah.
I love that. Where can people find these courses you're talking about? Like you have so much going on. Oh my gosh.
It's crazy. It's really a lot of so some of the courses are on the IFS Institute, like the continuity program I'm doing. Some of these courses are at Leading Edge Seminars. That's up in Canada. Most of the courses are on the PESI website, because they are the ones that are producing a lot of my content. People are buying them through them. So it's any of the way. I mean, you go to my website, really, it's all those links are on my website.
Great.
So people can get it that way too.
And what is your website?
Yeah, it's frankandersonmd.com.
Great.
Yeah.
And the last question, and then I'll let you go because I know you have to go, is if you weren't doing all of the stuff that you're doing, and I know you're doing a lot, what would you do instead? And you can't do any of the stuff you're doing. What would you do instead?
Oh my goodness. So I will retire someday. I'll tell you that. Like, I love my work.
I don't know that I believe you, but okay.
I know. I said to my husband, we're going to be sitting on a rocking chair someday looking out. And he's like, no, Frank, I don't think you're sitting on any rocking chair anytime soon. But I love being in nature, and I love exercising. Like, those are passion, and travel. Like, if I could not work. I could not work, but I wouldn't be sitting in a rocking chair.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But I would be traveling. I'd be in nature. I'd be exercising. That's what I would do. If work was taken away,
that's what you would do.
I can enjoy myself pretty easily.
But you like to be moving, right? You're like, your body wants to be moving.
I am such Bessel's book, Body Keeps the Score, like, so much is held in my body. And my body, body and nature, the more I heal, the more I'm attuned to nature through my body. Hiking is one of my favorite activities, yoga. Yeah. So that's what there's going to be no shortage of interest for me outside of my work, which I love.
That's great.
And I'm lucky for,
Thanks for hanging out today. If you like this episode, make sure you subscribe. And if you really like this episode, share it with a friend and leave a review. You can follow me on Instagram at IFS Tammy and join our community on Facebook at the One Inside Podcast. Talk to you next time.